I still remember the sound my suitcase made when I rolled it up the driveway. Hollow, lonely, out of place. 12 hours of travel, stiff joints, and that quiet excitement you feel when you're finally coming home. Or at least, when you think you are. The house looked the same from the street. Same white porch railing, I painted myself. Same oak tree leaning slightly left after the storm years ago. But something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. The key didn't turn. I tried again. Slower. Firmer. Nothing. I leaned closer and noticed a shine. Brand new locks. Silver. Clean. Confident. For a second, my brain refused to accept it. I checked the address like an idiot. Same number. Same mailbox. Same home I'd lived in for 34 years. I knocked. No answer. I rang the bell. Still nothing. Then I heard laughter inside. Music. Glasses clinking. A celebration. I stepped back and looked through the front window. And that's when I saw them. My family. Smiling. Toasting. My daughter-in-law raised her glass, laughing like she'd just won something. My son stood beside her, relaxed, proud, like a man who believed a chapter had finally closed. My bags were stacked on the lawn like trash. That's when my phone buzzed. A text from my son. We changed the locks. It's better this way. You can pick up the rest of your things later. No call. No explanation. Just a sentence that tried to erase decades. I sat down on my suitcase and waited. Not because I didn't know what to do, but because I wanted to see how far they'd go. Minutes passed. Then the door opened. My daughter-in-law stepped out, heels clicking against the concrete. She didn't look surprised. She looked satisfied. "Oh," she said, smiling. "You're back already." She glanced at the bags. We thought it was time for a change. My son didn't even come outside. He stayed in the doorway, arms crossed, watching like a stranger. "Dad," he said, "you don't live here anymore." I nodded slowly, not in defeat, in acknowledgement. They thought this was over. They thought locks meant ownership. They thought age meant weakness. What they didn't know was that this house wasn't just a place to me. It was paperwork, signatures, clauses, and decisions made quietly years ago. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I picked up my phone, typed one message, and sent it. Then I smiled, because while they were celebrating inside my house, I was already setting something in motion they couldn't stop. That night, I stayed at a small motel down the road. I laid on the bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it click with every rotation. I replayed every moment in my head, the laughter, the locks, the confidence. People always expose themselves when they think they've won, and my family had just exposed everything. I opened my briefcase and took out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were copies, originals, and one document none of them had ever seen. I didn't rush. Revenge doesn't like speed. It likes precision. Outside, my phone buzzed again. This time, a photo. My daughter-in-law, glass raised, captioned, "New Beginnings." I turned the phone face down and whispered to the empty room, "Enjoy it while it lasts." Because the celebration they were having was happening on borrowed ground. Morning came without urgency. No anger. No panic. Just clarity. I checked out of the motel early, nodded at the clerk, and drove past my own house slowly, like a stranger admiring someone else's property. Curtains were drawn. A car I didn't recognize sat in the driveway. They'd invited people. Of course they had. Victory loves witnesses. I parked a few streets away and sat in silence, hands resting on the steering wheel, letting the moment settle. 34 years of mortgage payments. Renovations done with my own hands. Taxes I never missed. And yet, one new lock had convinced them they own my life. People misunderstand ownership. They think it's about possession. It's not. It's about control, the kind that exists on paper long, before it shows up in reality. I drove to a quiet office building downtown. Beige walls, cheap coffee, the kind of place where things change hands without noise. The receptionist recognized me instantly. She always did. "Good morning," she said carefully. "You're early." I smiled. I didn't sleep much. She nodded. like she understood more than she let on, and handed me a visitor badge. In the conference room, sunlight cut across the table, landing directly on the folder I placed down. I opened it slowly. Deeds. Amendments. A trust agreement dated 8 years earlier. Back then, my son had just married. He'd asked me to simplify things for the future. I'd agreed, but on my terms. People hear what they want when you're older. They assume confusion where there is caution. I'd structured everything so the house remained protected, even from family, especially from family. The lawyer arrived 10 minutes later. Calm, efficient. He skimmed the documents, then looked up at me. So, he said, they changed the locks? I nodded and removed my belongings. He leaned back slightly. That accelerates things. I didn't ask what he meant. I already knew. Actions trigger clauses. Clauses trigger consequences. That's how order is maintained. He made a call. Short, quiet, then another. By noon, certified letters were already being prepared. Notices, legal language sharp enough to cut through arrogance. I left the office without ceremony and sat in my car again. My phone buzzed. A missed call from my son. I didn't return it. Instead, I watched the house through the rearview mirror as a delivery truck pulled up. More furniture. Bigger celebration. They were nesting, claiming territory. That's when the first letter arrived. Not to me, to them. A legal notice delivered by hand. I watched as the courier approached the door. My daughter-in-law answered. Her smile faded. She read the page once. Then again, she called for my son. He took it from her, brow furrowing. His confidence shifted. Subtle, but I saw it. People always change posture before they change behavior. My phone rang again. This time I answered. Dad, my son said, voice tight, we need to talk. I paused. About? Silence. Then, about the house. I smiled. No, I said calmly. You need to read. I hung up before he could respond. The rest of the day passed like a slow tide. Messages came in waves. Confusion, anger, bargaining. I ignored them all because the truth was already on its way, and it didn't require my voice. That evening, I returned to the motel and turned on the television, volume low. Outside, the sky darkened. Somewhere across town, my family was learning that locks don't protect you from what's already written. And tomorrow would be louder. By the third morning, the house felt different, even from a distance. The celebration energy had evaporated, replaced by tension you could almost smell. I parked across the street again, coffee cooling in the cup holder, watching the windows like a man observing weather patterns. My son's car was gone. He'd left early. Avoidance. Panic likes to move before sunrise. My daughter-in-law remained. I could tell by the pacing silhouette behind the curtains. Phone pressed to her ear, walking in tight circles. That's what people do when they're trying to regain control they never actually had. At exactly 9:17 a.m., the second notice arrived. This one wasn't friendly. No soft language. No courtesy phrasing. Just consequences spelled out in black ink. I watched her open the door, sign for it, then freeze halfway back inside. She read it standing in the doorway, sunlight hitting her face like exposure. Her shoulders dropped. Not dramatically, just enough to betray fear. Minutes later, she stormed out, heels striking the pavement hard, phone still glued to her ear. She didn't see me. People rarely notice what they've already dismissed. By noon, my lawyer called. They've contacted us, he said, demanding clarification. I laughed softly. There's nothing unclear. He agreed. They triggered the revocation clause when they removed you from the property. I leaned back on the motel bed. So the clock's running? It already ran, he replied. They just didn't hear it. That afternoon, my son finally showed up at the motel. He stood in the doorway like a boy waiting for permission. Older, taller, still unsure. Why didn't you tell us? He asked. I looked at him for a long moment. Tell you what? He gestured wildly. That you still controlled everything. I shook my head. I never controlled anything. I said calmly. I protected it. He sat down, rubbing his temples. She said the house was ours, that it was just a matter of time. I nodded. Time is only useful if you know what you're waiting for. He looked up, eyes sharp now. Can we fix this? I stood and walked to the window. You already tried fixing it, I said, with locks. Silence filled the room. Thick, heavy. He finally spoke. She's scared. I turned to face him. Good, I said quietly. Fear makes people honest. He left without another word. That evening, the power shifted publicly. Utility companies began calling. Accounts frozen pending verification. Mail rerouted. The house wasn't just unstable, it was legally hollow, a structure without authority. I received another message, this time from my daughter-in-law. We need to talk. Please. No smile, no confidence, just urgency. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a folder again and reviewed the final page, the one with instructions that activated only after breach. It was simple, elegant, unforgiving, the kind of clause people skim past because they assume it'll never matter. By nightfall, I drove past the house one last time. Lights on, curtains open, 2 figures sitting at the table, heads bowed, paperwork spread out like a failed defense. They were finally reading, and for the first time since I arrived home, I slept peacefully. The 4th day didn't start with noise. It started with silence, the kind that settles after panic burns itself out. I woke before dawn, not from anxiety, but from habit. Old routines die hard. I shaved carefully, dressed neatly, and ate breakfast alone in the motel dining area, watching steam rise from a chipped mug. Across town, my house was no longer a home. It was a problem. At 8:03 a.m., my lawyer called again. His voice was steady, almost amused. They've hired counsel, he said. Aggressive one. I smiled. Good. That means they finally understand the stakes. He paused. They're claiming confusion, saying they believed you transferred ownership verbally. I laughed quietly. Verbal ownership, I repeated. That's adorable. By mid-morning, the official notice was filed. Trespass, unauthorized removal of property, breach of trust, each line precise, each word heavy. I drove to the courthouse not because I had to be there, but because I wanted to walk past the building knowing what was happening inside. There's a certain satisfaction in proximity. You don't need to participate to feel the shift. Outside, my phone buzzed nonstop. My son, his wife, numbers I didn't recognize. I let it ring. When people panic, they talk too much. I preferred listening later. That afternoon, I finally answered one call. My daughter-in-law's voice came through brittle, stripped of its edge. We made a mistake, she said quickly. We thought we misunderstood. I leaned against my car and closed my eyes. No, I replied. You understood perfectly. You just assumed I wouldn't act. She swallowed. I could hear it. We can change the locks back. I smiled. Locks aren't the issue. Silence stretched. Then desperation crept in. Where are we supposed to go? She asked. That question landed exactly where it should have. I ended the call without answering. By evening, the house was officially flagged. Sale blocked. Assets frozen. Occupancy under dispute. What they thought was a takeover had turned into a trap. I returned to motel and opened my briefcase again, removing the final envelope. Inside was a letter I'd written years ago. Not angry, not threatening, just factual. It outlined boundaries, expectations, and consequences. I'd never sent it because I'd hoped it would never be needed. Hope is a luxury. Preparation is insurance. I forwarded the scan to my lawyer. Release it, I said. He understood. That night, the letter arrived in their inboxes. I imagined them reading it together, realizing this wasn't reaction. It was design. The document didn't insult them. It didn't shame them. It simply explained that I had anticipated this exact moment, that I had built safeguards because love without limits invites entitlement. The next morning would bring decisions they couldn't delay anymore. The house would either be vacated or forcibly corrected. And for the first time since they changed those locks, they weren't celebrating. They were waiting. And waiting, I knew, was harder than losing. The fifth morning came with rain. Not heavy, not dramatic, just enough to make everything feel slower, heavier, unavoidable. I watched droplets crawl down the motel window as my phone finally went quiet. No calls, no messages. Silence had replaced panic, and silence meant decisions were being made. By mid-morning, my lawyer confirmed it. "They're packing," he said. "Try to do it quietly." I nodded. Quiet exits are what people choose when pride is already lost. I drove past the house one last time before things officially changed. A rented truck sat in the driveway, boxes stacked near the door. My daughter-in-law stood on the porch, arms crossed tight against her chest, staring at the street like she expected judgment to drive by. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and chose not to. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. The house no longer belonged to their story. Inside, my son moved slowly, carefully, like a guest overstaying his welcome. I could tell from the way he handled things, gently, apologetically. He was learning something he should have understood years ago, that shortcuts always charge interest. By noon, the locks were removed, not replaced. Removed. The house sat open, exposed, waiting. I didn't rush. I waited until evening, until the truck was gone and the driveway empty. Then I returned. Walking through the front door felt different this time. Not triumphant. Grounded. The air smelled like cardboard and regret. Empty rooms echoed with footsteps that used to belong to family. I picked up a picture frame left behind. My son as a child, smiling without expectation. I placed it gently on the counter and kept moving. Some things weren't mine to carry anymore. I changed nothing that night. No furniture. No locks. Just stood in the living room and let the silence settle. Control doesn't announce itself. It restores balance quietly. The next morning, the final notice was served. Relocation terms. No contact clauses. Conditions made clear. There would be no dramatic court appearance. No public spectacle. Just compliance. That's how real power works. It removes the need for confrontation. My son called once more. His voice was different now. Smaller. "I didn't think you'd really do it," he admitted. I took a breath. "That's the problem," I said. "You stopped thinking of me as capable." He didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. When the call ended, I sat at the kitchen table and opened the final document, the one that officially reset everything. Ownership confirmed. Trust restored. Boundaries enforced. It was over. Or at least, that's what they believed. Because consequences don't always arrive all at once. Sometimes they linger, teaching lessons long after the moment passes. That evening, I changed the locks myself. Slowly, methodically, not out of anger, but closure. I labeled the spare keys and placed them exactly where I wanted them. For the first time since returning, I slept in my own bed. And tomorrow I would decide what came next. The sixth day felt lighter, not because the past had disappeared, but because it finally sat where it belonged. Behind me, morning sunlight poured through the kitchen window, touching the same counter where arguments once echoed. I made coffee and drank it slowly, standing, listening to the house breathe again. Ownership isn't just legal. It's emotional, and the house had chosen quiet over chaos. By mid-morning, the final confirmations arrived. Accounts normalized. Utilities restored under my name. Mail delivered where it belonged. Each notification was small, uncelebrated, but together they formed something solid. Completion. I walked room to room, not to inspect damage, but to reset memory. I opened windows, let air move through corners that had grown tense. In the study, I placed the folder back into the cabinet where it would stay, untouched again. Preparation had done its job. Outside, neighbors waved. Some asked gentle questions. I answered none of them directly. Stories don't need retelling when the ending is clear. Around noon, my son sent one last message. No excuses. No demands. Just 4 words. I understand now. I read it once, then archived it. Understanding after consequence isn't wisdom, it's tuition. I didn't block him. I didn't invite him either. Boundaries don't require hostility. They require consistency. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer briefly to close the file. He shook my hand and said, "You handled this with restraint." I smiled. "Restraint isn't weakness." I replied, "It's timing." On the drive home, I passed a motel where this began. Same parking lot, same flickering sign. It looked smaller now, temporary. Exactly what it had been. Back at the house, I sat on the porch as evening settled in. The oak tree rustled softly. The same tree that had seen storms, repairs, laughter, and loss. I thought about how quickly people confuse access with entitlement, love with leverage, age with surrender. They assume patience means permission. It doesn't. It means observation. When night came, I turned off the lights one by one, leaving only the porch lamp glowing, not as a welcome, as a signal. This place was protected again, not by anger, not by locks alone, but by clarity. The celebration they'd thrown ended quietly. No apologies demanded, no revenge announced, just consequences applied exactly as written. And that, I realized, was the most complete ending of all. Because when people learn the truth without you raising your voice, it stays with them forever.